Home sellers, what are you guys waiting for? What's going on, guys? It's Scott, Pete. We are back for another episode of Behind the Curtains. And this week we wanted to focus on sellers, right? We've talked a lot about buyers, sellers. Now it's your turn. We got to figure out, I know we're not going to leave you homeless, but also, what are you waiting for? So, Pete, let's talk about it.
What's up, man? Scott, good to be back. So yeah, I think, we've really just had some conversations around, we know that the media can have a huge impact on the perception of what's really happening in the real estate market. We know that, look, it's just a matter of numbers. There are people out there who want to sell their home, right? Who want to relocate and move to different locations, but they're not. And so we're here to kind of talk a little bit about why maybe you're not, and what are some myths that are maybe out there. And we know we have an interesting week this week with the Fed meeting and jobs reports and stuff like that. So we'll definitely do a more in-depth market update, state of the market, as we do every month next week. But for now, it's just really a matter of dispelling some myths and kind of going over some numbers and really kind of trying to give some confidence to sellers who maybe want to make a move, and how, why now would be a good time to do it.
Yeah, and I think it's important because we're also, I can't remember if we discussed this, but we're right now we are reading a book called Shift, which we had also read right at the beginning of COVID. And basically it's all about like the shifts that happen in a real estate market, and how do we serve our clients by being aware of those shifts and how they impact both buyers and sellers. And I think for anyone, it's pretty obvious. You mentioned like the media has been covering the fact that we've seen interest rates take a big jump, right? And I think there's a lot of different messaging out there in mass media right now around how that's impacting the market. On a local level, we're seeing that shift. But we're also looking at the reality that I would say the number one thing that hasn't changed has been inventory levels, right? And so I think today we've got to focus on inventory and what that means for a home seller who, again, we're not going to force you to sell your house if you don't have a strong motivation to do something. But usually, when people sell and buy, it's based on changes in their own life, right? That cause them to make a move with their home. Whether that's downsizing, upsizing, it's a life event, getting married, having kids, tons of things. These things happen, right? They're still continuing to happen. And that's the basis of today's conversation is we know people are still getting married. We know people are still having kids. We know people are retiring and looking to downsize. So what are you guys waiting for? Don't be scared of the mass media messaging that's out there. This market is able to be navigated when you work with a strong agent like Pete or I. So,
yeah. And I think one of the things, and you kind of touched on inventory levels, right, is the inventory levels. No, even if we have, 100 more homes that hit the market this week, or even today, those homes are going to sell and we're going to be right back at lower inventory levels, just because the demand is just so high. And when we've done some of our research, and let's give a shout out here to Kyle Kovacs. He is a person we respect in this industry, and he does a great job of really taking the emotion out of it and just giving you straight up data, right? And so we love Kyle and the data that he provides. So kind of looking over one of his emails, like one of the big things and one of the big impacts with inventory levels is that there isn't enough developing, because developing for single family homes is very expensive, but it's also not lucrative, right? It's not a profitable endeavor for someone to go and build a single family home that is under 1,400 square feet, right? Your more starter home type property. So what you're seeing is apartment buildings go up by developers, right? Because those are more profitable. And you're seeing luxury homes, the high-end homes, the 2,000 to 3,000 square foot homes, and then some. I actually saw another report, not by Kyle, that the number of $1 million homes is at an all-time high throughout the country, which I also think is interesting. But the bottom line is we're not getting more starter homes coming on the market in any sort of influx. So I think that that's something to keep in mind. And Go ahead.
So I want to just cut in because I know you had some really good numbers also on like mortgage delinquencies and that side of things where unrelated to inventory, because I've got some other numbers to share on inventory and like forecasting forward here in the market. But like the other thing that I've heard people, especially home sellers, say is like, well, like I want to kind of wait and time this where like prices start coming back down and I'll sell like at the peak, but hopefully be able to buy something in a little bit more of normal market. And the numbers don't lie when it comes to like the market crashing. And you had some really solid numbers by way of Kyle related to like mortgage delinquencies and home equity, things that are like indicators that the market's not about to just drop out from underneath us.
Yeah, when it comes to mortgage delinquencies, I have it here. You know, the national delinquency rate hit an all-time low in March, which was 2.84% of, of homes that were mortgage delinquent. The previous record was January 2020 at 3.22%. So we're at an all-time low of delinquent mortgages, which means that we're not going to see this big influx of foreclosures. And even when you do see, because I've had this a lot, right? We got into the business as we were recovering from the crash of 07, 08. And so the big thing as we were getting into the business towards the tail end of that crash and the recession is, I'm sure you got a lot. People would call me and say, I want to buy a foreclosure. And I would say, well, why do you want to buy a foreclosure? And it would be because I want to get a great deal. Now, at that point in time, foreclosures were a great deal because there were so many of them. But at that time, when I was having that conversation, foreclosures were going for fair market value.
Yep.
You had to take the chance that it was. So foreclosures are only of value if there is a surplus of them.
Yeah, and the delinquency on mortgages, it's funny because I do remember at the beginning of COVID, like the fear was that, oh my God, all these people are losing their jobs. How is that going to affect mortgages, right? All of a sudden, we're going to go back to that place where everyone's delinquent on their mortgage. Instead, the market rebounding, people getting back to work, home prices went up, people got back into jobs. So even if they did have to, forego a couple payments on their mortgage, they got caught back up. So those delinquencies are, again, like being at such a low rate is that lead measure that tells us it's not like there's a hidden shadow hiding over here of a bunch of, delinquent mortgages that are going to hit as foreclosures in the near future. So that's covered. And then what was the other one that you said about people's equity in their home?
Oh, yes. Give me 1 second real quick. Just that, so based on this, this source, Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System shows that households' equity is over 2/3 of household real estate, meaning that 2/3 of real estate in this country is equity as opposed to debt.
Which is insane. Like, and I think that's the other thing that's lost on people is like when you try and look back to 2006, 2007, 2008, what happened there was, again, like those, they joke about, and neither of us were in the business at the time, but I still remember, like, I hear it to this day, that phrase, like, if you could basically fog up a mirror, right? You had a breath, you had, a heartbeat, you were getting a mortgage. And oftentimes people were going into these home purchases in an inflated market with like no money, the bank wasn't doing any kind of review. So to know that there is 2/3 equity sitting in the overall like housing market right now points to the fact that even if, we had another, recession where some people lost their jobs and, on occasion, like they're going to be delinquent on their mortgages, there's so much equity in those homes that banks are really going to be motivated to work with that person to get them back on track versus coming in and saying, hey, we're going to take this home back because you basically have no equity in it and there's no way out of this for you. So that's a really positive thing. And then going back to inventory, it's crazy. We are right now approximately 5 million houses short of meeting the supply of home buyers in the market nationally. And then the crazy thing about that is that current demand is 1.5 million homes to be purchased annually. And yet where are we getting new homes? It's going back to what you were talking about, right? The construction. Yet because of, supply chain and all these things, and as well, like builders just not building that starter home, 1.5 million home demand, 1.3 million new homes set to be completed this year. So not only are we not making up ground on this $5 million homes shortage, we're actually losing ground.
Yeah,
The demand is continuing to be there and the supply is not catching up to it. We're in a tricky spot here, but again, going back to the message, this is not meant to be scare tactics. We're here to guide you guys. This isn't going to change, go away. The market is going to continue to be really interesting, and that's why we're here to help guide you and make sure that you go seamlessly from point A to point B in your home buying and selling journey. So
yeah, and I think there's another thing just to keep in mind as some like kind of an interesting point, because now people who are thinking of selling their home, who likely refinanced, right, if they were in a higher rate environment when they bought their home, refinanced somewhere in the high twos, low threes if they capitalized on that, which was great. And so now they're kind of looking at it and saying, well, now I'm going to buy in the fives, and who knows, by the time you get your house on the market and get it sold. But the reality is that it's not affecting home values right now, right? And the longer you wait, the higher rates could be. Now, also keeping in mind that the reason that interest rates have increased so significantly over the last 2 months is to hedge against inflation, amongst other things, but to really work against inflation. So in the event that we do hit a recession or we do hit some sort of economic change, we can then lower the interest rates. So I can't say anything with 100% certainty, right? Neither of us can. But I think if you're locking in a 30-year rate right now, a 30-year loan, chances are at some point within that 30-year loan, rates are going to come back down under where you're buying now. So, just again, a little bit of peace of mind for that person who's looking to upgrade and buy that next house, but is concerned about, the interest rates. We all know that they're still, even at 5 or 5.5, they're still at very low in the grand scheme of things. And just one other thing I want to just squeak in here from Kyle's information here is, and I'm not going to go through everything, but if you look back in between, he outlines the 70s, basically 1970 to 1979, when you saw a big increase in interest rates and what that did to home values. Home values continue to appreciate. Home values continue to go up. So looking at interest rates and looking at, inflation and all these other things is an important thing in the big picture. But when you're looking at where this real estate market is going to go, in my opinion, it all comes down to inventory. And until that inventory issue is fixed, which we don't know when it's going to be, I think I feel pretty confident that home values are propped up based basically on the low inventory levels, regardless of rate and inflation.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing, the overarching message we wanted to send today was that we know that fear causes inaction. So if you are someone thinking of selling and fear has gotten a hold of you, just reach out, because through education, we can make sure that you shed that fear and seek that path forward for you, your family, and what's in your best interest. So that's my final note for the day.
No, absolutely. We have people in our pipeline and who we know will be selling, and we're not knocking on their door every single day to say, hey, are you ready to go? We're just continuing to give them the information until they're ready. And we'd be happy to do the same for you. So what do you think? Why are you waiting? What are your thoughts on the real estate market? Is there going to be a crash? I would hope after you watch this whole video, there isn't going to be a crash. But until next week, thank you so much. Be sure to hit a like, drop a comment, and we will see you next week with our market update.